are backing winners. They've got programs to accelerate investment in areas like energy storage, in electric vehicle infrastructure. So they have in broadband. So they have recognized this challenge in being smaller markets. I think the conundrum I'd like to highlight is that the UK certainly has the building blocks, the opportunity to focus on sustainable technology, focus on leadership. We have the history of innovation. We have the opportunity, the open markets, to exploit new technology and service models in these markets. I believe that our challenge and opportunity is today we have very diverse and fragmented government funding mechanisms that are overly opaque. Faraday, BIS, Catapult, UK infrastructure, it's a quagmire. Other countries have much more focused programs. When you look at the EIB, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, in other markets that are providing real juice, real momentum. I think the scattering of funding often in this market goes into R&D and diverse programs. We look at the evidence of EIB, for example, where they're providing not just R&D funding, but some development funding for companies to cross the chasm. So those companies that have raised, let's say, 5 to 10 million already and demonstrated that they are that they have some degree of momentum may benefit from a follow-on 15 million quasi-equity or credit financing. We have that opportunity to have a much more focused approach to funding sustainable energy. I believe it's an important part of our future. The UK certainly has the entrepreneurship. We have a good, strong, open market. And our challenge is a better focus in terms of our capital to drive momentum in a very strategic sector, which we recognize is going to attract capital, it'll attract human capital, it attracts investment in jobs. With that, I'd like to perhaps open up or turn over to my colleagues.
Great, thank you. So I'd say that was a yes, possible opportunity, but better focus of our capital. Michael.
Okay, so thank you very much. And first of all, I apologise, you're hearing quite a lot from me here. But what I would do is take it from the last session where I talked about that sort of what I call the 3/3 world. 1/3 of electricity will be solar and wind, 1/3 of vehicles will be electric, and will be 1/3 more energy efficient, and it's all fabulous by 2040, but it's not enough. Not only is it not a zero carbon world, it's not even actually on track to be a zero carbon world. Right? However, the question, can we get to zero carbon? The answer is unequivocally yes. And not only can we, but we will, because at the end of the day, those emissions are actually a signal of waste. That the fact that so much of what we actually do with our primary energy, the 68% of primary energy that is waste, by the time you try and reduce that, what you actually find is that the clean solutions are cheaper. So the good news is, and we've seen it now with renewable energy becoming cheaper than fossil. It's complicated, it takes time, it requires the right frameworks around it. But as Bruce said, innovation will happen, and we'll continue down that route. The problem is it won't be fast enough, right? Or the question is, can we do it fast enough? Can we do it? The answer is yes. Can we do it fast enough? And we have to start by looking at, it is not just in the electricity system. It's so tempting always to say, well, we can solve this because it's electricity. And if your model is, we are going to, what does zero carbon look like? Well, it looks like everything goes electric and electric goes clean. Well, right now, just taking stock, right now, everything, electricity going clean will take about 150 years. And everything going electric will take about 300 years. That's the rate we're currently going at. Electric vehicles will speed that up, by the way. But electric, all of ground transportation is still only another. So electricity is 20% of the world's final energy consumption. Transportation, you've got another sort of 20%, 25%, and you've got to deal with heat, and you've got to deal with industry if you really want to get there. You've got to deal with deforestation. You've got to deal with agriculture and land use and so on. And you've got to go after some of those big chunks. If you want to really get to zero. I take it this is a discussion not about can we go a bit further, this is a zero. Now, so that's a long way of saying if you want to have a discussion about 100% renewable energy, 100%, then count me out. I'm not interested in it, partly because I think it's down the track. And what we need to be doing is learning by doing. We'll figure out the exact mix, whether it's 100% renewable or whether it requires some nuclear or whether it requires something else. We will figure that out as long as we are moving at the right sorts of speeds, at which we're currently not. I think I suspect we're going to get onto the questions of carbon price. A carbon price or many carbon prices would definitely help. It would accelerate it. I think we'll get there in any case. And then I'll conclude just by referring back, if I might, to my final slide of the previous presentation, which is sort of about this question of picking winners. And with respect, China doesn't just pick sectoral winners. Everybody picks sectoral winners. We also have picked various sectors. What China does is pick actual company winners. And you'll remember companies like Suntech. It doesn't always end out well. What they actually do is pick a sector, then pick champions with it, and then hose money at them. And that's one of the reasons why America is now pushing back, and Trump is pushing back the way he does. So we definitely don't want to be doing that. We do want to be picking our sectors. Right? There's no question we need to pick sectors, probably more sectors than you might think we need. And then what we need to do is act with joined up thinking. I very strongly agree with Bruce. Right across, it could be building codes and teaching apprentices that could be more important than putting 20 million or 40 million or whatever, actually, in fact, very modest amounts of money into this initiative that looks good on an announcement or that initiative that looks good on an announcement. We've got to actually really think about what are the policy levers that move right across the country and right across these difficult sectors of heat and industry and agriculture and so on. But I'm very optimistic because I'm an optimist. I can't bear to think about what happens if if I'm not allowed to be optimistic, then it's bad.
And just to clarify, Michael, on those numbers you gave about rate of change, so 100%, current rates, 100% electricity clean, 150 years, everything electric, 300 years. Is that global or is that UK?
That's global. That's based on just, electricity and its penetration into... In 1970, 10% of the world's economy was run on electricity. That's now 22%.
Right.
Well, that's great, but, that's 50 years, and we've only gone from 10 to 20. Right? That's not fast enough. We need to be going from 20 to 50 in probably 2-3 decades if we really want to be on track.
And UK ahead or behind of those trends?
I don't know. The IEA is very good for that sort of question. I suspect we're ahead, but remember we do most of our heating with gas.
Yeah.
So energy efficiency, but get serious about our buildings, and then some of them can go to heat pumps. And that's probably one of the most important things that we can do outside that, electric vehicles and wind farm. And I want to say it explicitly, banning onshore wind farms effectively through the planning system is self-harm. It is costing UK consumers and businesses money today.
Right, very clear. Craig, same question for you.
Thanks. In 1885, my great-grandfather plowed virgin Nebraska prairie that contained 100 tons of carbon per acre. By the time I was born, that was down to 10. The other 90 tons of carbon that was in that soil is now in the atmosphere. We have to, and we can, put that carbon back in the earth. Britain has signed up, and at the Real Farming Conference in January, Michael Gove reaffirmed that commitment. Britain has signed up to the 4 per thousand initiative that was tabled at Paris COP21. This states that if farming and forestry could increase soil organic matter by 4 parts per thousand, that would be enough to totally offset the annual 16 billion ton increase in greenhouse gas levels. The French, in response to that, set a €65 a ton carbon tax that comes into effect in 2020. If everyone had to budget 56 euros a ton for every net ton of carbon emitted, they'd be happy to purchase tax-reducing offsets from farming and forestry. Some organic and regenerative farmers have increased soil organic matter annually by as much as 7 parts per thousand. If everybody farmed like that, we'd be looking at a 12 billion ton annual decrease in greenhouse gas levels. Incentives work better than regulation. Carrots work better than sticks. And we've heard a lot about sticks today. Farmers are better than Whitehall at making those thousands of micromanagement decisions necessary to manage our wide variety of soils and landscapes. So what would happen if there were a €65 a ton carbon price? Farmers would reduce inputs such as nitrates, pesticides, herbicides. They'd increase soil carbon by the use of grass sleighs, compost, biochar. They'd minimize tillage. They'd plant trees and wildflower meadows instead of growing rapeseed for biodiesel. We'd stop burning forests in power stations like Drax. Wood would replace steel and concrete in buildings and homes. Peat use would end overnight, and peat bogs could go back to being carbon sinks. And the sea would be more productive as harmful algal blooms disappeared. Soil is the world's most important and valuable commodity. With a realistic carbon price, we wouldn't suffer the resource misallocation of agricultural subsidies, exemplified in the Common Agriculture Policy. The global commodity market for certified carbon could exceed £1 billion annually, a greater commodity market in value than oil or coffee. It would be a real opportunity for Britain's financial services industry to make London the global hub for carbon trading with integrity and quality of product. It was double counting political intervention and poor measurement that led to the collapse of the post-Kyoto carbon market. This wouldn't happen again if the main government intervention was just to set a carbon floor price. Given a free hand, farmers and foresters can do the rest and ensure that we can achieve the ambitious goals set out in the government's 25-year environment plan and achieve zero carbon sooner and later and inaugurate a new era for farming, fishing, and the environment. Thank you.
Right, okay. So the answer to the question is a definite yes, and you've set out how you think it needs to happen.
I think we can go beyond neutral. We can start taking carbon levels down in the atmosphere.
Okay, great. Polly.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, the clever answer is no, because we're carbon creatures, so we'll continue to emit carbon in some way or another. But I think we do need to establish a net zero balance on our emissions, and that's what Craig's been talking about in terms of absorption and sequestration. I suppose the more sensible and sort of slightly less facetious answer is I don't know, and then identify the barriers that are in our way. And I think there are obviously people on the panel who are much more qualified than me to talk about the technologies, and we've heard about that. I'm sort of centering this on the human perspective rather than the technical perspective. I've been at far too many conferences with people who've worked out in a bit of a sort of professor brainstorm sort of a way how the system would work, which doesn't actually think about how people will interact with it. And that ends up fundamentally being quite a lot of the failure that we see in many of our very technical responses to the climate change challenge. Because the reality is we've got a sort of unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. We've got the laws of physics and the laws of politics. And the people have sort of said that those two are absolutely in opposition to each other. But my argument is unless we harness the laws of politics to help us meet the challenges of the laws of physics, we are not going to reach what we're trying to do. That will require leadership. Now, I'm going to make myself slightly unpopular with members of the panel by saying that I have retained my disappointment when people cite China as an example of the kind of leadership we're talking about. However, the examples they've given are ones that I feel slightly less uncomfortable with. I just think the human rights record, in fact, that you're not necessarily sure that you're going to have your kidneys when you wake up, is an example of why we might not necessarily see their governance structures and their politics as the way forward. And simply because a big authoritarian country can do stuff in a big authoritarian way does not necessarily mean that it will solve the problem of climate change. Because people matter, and the way that we build our organisation, UK 100, has in its mission statement that we support local leaders to be able to achieve what we're talking about in terms of 100% clean energy, and it's clean rather than renewable, to your point, Michael, which takes people and business with us. Because if we don't take people and business with us, we will end up spending all of our time, as many both technical and engineers and also market obsessives say, well, if only people engage with the market a bit more, then it would all be okay. Or if only they behaved in this particular way, they would reduce their energy consumption or whatever. We need to be working with the grain of humankind rather than against it. And I think sometimes, although not with this panel, I think there are some people in politics who will say that, well, we just need this sort of Stalinist approach or dictatorial approach, partly because they don't want anything to happen, or partly because they've actually got a sneaking suspicion that actually that kind of authoritarianism will be exactly what they'd like. And I'm quite clear that that will not be the way that we will achieve the zero carbon that we're talking about. And I put this in the context particularly of the politics around climate change, if you consider what happened in Copenhagen. I sort of bear the mental scars of having been at Copenhagen and having spent the 2 years up to it trying to establish that that was going to be the most ambitious deal possible. It didn't work because we had entirely constructed the politics the wrong way round, and it ended up falling apart when the leaders came in and said, hang on a minute, this isn't what we ordered. If you do it the other way round, which is what was so much more successful about Paris, when you have a bottom-up approach, when countries are able to establish what their own nationally determined contributions will be, you will get something which already has some buy-in. I would extend that further beyond the national approach to a local one. We have 85 local authorities, local leaders of authorities and mayors of this country committed to 100% clean energy by 2050. I don't know whether that is exactly the timetable that will work for the physics, but I know it's one that is actually set by the politics of the Climate Change Act. And there is no statutory obligation in this country for local leaders to do anything about that. So we have come up with that mechanism on its own. And the reason why those people are better placed is for many of the reasons that have been pointed out by the other panelists, is that we need to have a cross-functional approach. We need to see this as whole systems. This is located in place. If you only have one technology, you don't think about the consequences of others. If you are a local leader, you're concerned about housing, you're concerned about transport, you're concerned about public space, you're concerned about clean air. All of those things become the things that you've actually got levers on. And if those people can lead, then we can be able to get closer. So I want to end on that optimistic note, that there is leadership on this, and not only that there is that cooperation at national level, but what Mark's organisation does at C40 is another example of the city-to-city global diplomacy that actually makes climate change, tackling climate change achievable. But we need to remember what local leaders are best at doing, and that is sending signals to the market, a bit like what Michael was saying. So, for example, procuring a cleaner fleet, setting higher standards. That's being done by Liverpool, Leeds and Leicester in this country. Design your cities to encourage people and encourage entrepreneurs to do what they do best, which is seize opportunities to change people's behaviours. Nobody thought that undocked bikes were going to take off. They're not only happening in London, they're happening in Oxford and other places across the world. That was entrepreneurialism supported by municipal leadership. And look across your functions. And most importantly, remember that the laws of physics you'll bump up against the laws of physics unless you harness them. Local leaders are looking for validation from their public. Ultimately, I say, if you can't put it on a leaflet and stick it through a door and feel confident that you're going to get the support of the public, then you're probably not doing it right. You're not telling the story right. So this will make your community healthier and wealthier and more comfortable and feel better about itself. Those are the things that motivate politicians, because they're the things that motivate the public in a democracy. And that's why I think we can be actually quite positive about the opportunities available. We can talk a little bit more about Brexit, but I'm sure that will come up in the discussion.
I hope so. So, fantastic start there. I think we have unanimity on the one-word answer to the question, but 4 quite different perspectives. But to follow on from where Polly started there about a human-centred approach, we very much need that in action in this room now, because this session is only going to work if lots of people participate, and unusually we've got quite a bit of time. I can see 2 enthusiastic hands straight away, 3. So I'll take comments, questions in groups of 3, and then ask the panel to come back. And there's a microphone behind you, so I think, yeah.
Hi, I'm Ed King from the European Climate Foundation. You've all talked a bit about specific policies like a carbon price, onshore winds, a unified funding system. I just wonder, It's quite easy when we're talking about a sort of carbon zero future to look out to 2050, but just if we could think about the next sort of 2 years, what are the specific policies or initiatives that you would, given the political climate in the UK, you would like to see the government think about or implement up to 2020 that could start us on the pathway towards a zero carbon future?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So Pasco Sabido from Corporate Europe Observatory. I was just going to touch on the Brexit question and pose it because I think it's been interesting to have these debates, but take away the word Brexit and we could be in any business and climate conference that I've been to for the last however many years. So for Brexit, the sort of thing, what is the thing that you want to get rid of that would make it easier to achieve the zero carbon future, and what might be the things you'd want to keep? Because if we're looking at negotiations, both from, I guess, your sector, I mean, I think we've got quite a diverse range of panelists. I mean, it doesn't feel like, I guess, industrial sectors are here, but perhaps from your sector and more generally, and how much of these things you're talking about would be achievable while staying in the European Union?
And then, yes, gentlemen here. And the first three hands I saw here were all men. Let's hope for some women in the next round.
Hi, thank you. Less of a question, more of an observation and a concern. My name's Anthony Thistleton. I'm an architect, and we work in engineered timber, particularly doing what Craig is advocating, which is using timber as a replacement for concrete and steel. One of the frustrations we've found is we've been lobbying for embodied carbon to be included in building codes. You know, we talk about energy reduction. The calculations that we've done show that, in fact, the predominant source of carbon for an average dwelling is its embodied carbon for the first 50 to 60 years of its life. We've just had a session with the GLA putting their London Plan out to consultation, and very disappointed to find that in the original draft there was one mention of embodied carbon. I think we've got that up to 2, but there's no pressure to put any imposition on any development of any scale to reduce to measure or reduce the embodied carbon.
Great. So we had 3 questions there. What about embodied carbon in building codes? What's the thing you most want to get rid of or most want to keep in the context of Brexit? And then specific policies in the next 2 years. Polly, do you want to go first as you finished the last bit?
Yeah, I've got a massive list for Ed on what we're to do in the next 2 years. Our proposal to meet the funding gap that was referred to earlier, particularly for local authorities, because they don't get access to development capital either, and they don't necessarily have the legal and financial capacity to be able to put together the kind of projects that at scale with proven technologies that would be transformative in this country. So we've proposed clean energy city partnerships, a finance facility, all those pots of money that people were talking about that nobody knows where they are, where they sit, SALIX and OLEV and so forth. There are people who know where they sit, and those are the leprechauns that you need to be able to hire to go and get those pots of gold and make them accessible to local authorities. Then private finance will be available. We need to restart carbon capture and storage, particularly for our industry. Michael mentioned that. We've got a couple of places in this country where we could do that. Reform Ofgem so they actually have climate change, not just something they have to bear in mind, but it is actually integral to the way that they design markets. I've got fed up of being in rooms with Ofgem where they kind of make out that not only are people wrong because they don't engage with the market correctly, but everything is all right now, and if we tweak it in any way in order to be able to make climate change a priority, it's all going to fall over and poor people are going to suffer. That's not necessarily have to be the way it is. Net zero building standards like we have in London, available for all cities across the country, and for them to be able to raise a levy to be able to generate an investment pot, end business rates on renewable energy, and stop the National Planning Inspectorate ripping out the ambitious standards of local authorities every time they try to be able to establish them. So if we did those in the next 2 years, we'd actually be in a considerably better place. This country is still massively centralised. The leaders have that ambition, and without them having the support of national government to be able to achieve these things, we'll fall off track. Anthony, I agree with you about embodied carbon. I'm disappointed that it's not in the London Plan in more ways. I've spoken to architects about this. When you have the kind of housing stock that we've got, we need to be very careful about suggesting that we need to knock everything down and start again. People love their shonky old Victorian homes. We will not be able to get them to adopt a climate-friendly lifestyle if we suggest there is something fundamentally wrong with those homes. Let's keep them and let's make sure that we are deeply retrofitting them. And we won't be able to do that unless we're generating income to be able to do it.
Great. I'll come back this way, Craig.
Coming back first on glulam and these laminated timber technologies, they are, just for the benefit of the audience, have the resilience of steel and the load-bearing capacity of concrete. If you priced carbon at, say, 56 euros a ton into it, steel and concrete would be more expensive than wood and less efficient. So that embodiment is a necessity. I live in a house that was built in 1770. The floorboards come from oak trees that were probably acorns in 1200. That carbon is still there, and I hope it's still going to be there in 200 years. What would I get rid of? I would stop biofuels and palm oil. James Thornton talked about the false accounting. You cannot make a case for a tree spending 50 years taking carbon out of the atmosphere, a power station spending 50 minutes putting it back in the atmosphere, and then waiting 50 years for a new tree to take that carbon back out of the atmosphere. If you could handle money like that, we'd all be rich. You know, I'd go to the bank and borrow 50 million and pay it back in 50 years' time. My wish, and you know, I referred to Michael Gove's commitment, is to keep Britain on track for the 4 per thousand commitment. If we do that, that transforms farming and delivers all the goals that are in that 25-year farming environment plan that is up for consultation now, but is pretty much there. The forest carbon, there is pressure from various quarters that somehow forest carbon and soil carbon should be cheaper than energy reduction carbon, because it's cheaper to grow a tree than to cut down, insulate, or in some other way. I think all carbon has to be priced equally. And that may be painful. It may mean that it slows transition to electricity. It may mean that we burn gas for longer. But the cheapest way of reducing atmospheric carbon is the way that we should prioritize, not devalue. Have I answered all the questions?
I think you've addressed them all. Mark.
I will, let me just say that I very much disagree with the single price for carbon, because what happens is first of all, we need to do all of the above. So this idea of doing the cheap things first and waiting for the other things, we will have lock-in, we will have the failure to develop technologies, and you will have absolutely vast, politically unacceptable, unmanageable, not unacceptable, but politically unmanageable transfer payments. And that's why we need to do sectoral by sector. We need the carbon prices, but we need it sector by sector, and it needs to take into account co-benefits and co-disadvantages of different solutions and so on. But I want to answer the questions, because I know that you're dying to maybe we'll go into that. But to your point about embodied carbon buildings, so I built a ski chalet, and it's got one floor of concrete, and then the rest of it is wood. And I calculated, I thought, well, if I build this high enough, the wood should counteract the carbon. So I'm the only person with a 25-story ski chalet. Well, I would have been had I gone down that route. I use local wood pellets and solar thermal to heat it, so I'm trying to be virtuous to make up for the fact that the floors of concrete are terrible. So I agree, we've got to fix that and get the embodied carbon, or some other regulatory approach which puts a virtual price that encourages that. Just in terms of what I would do in the next 2 years, I mean, just in general, you know, what she said would be a good policy for I think all of us on this panel. You know, there's so much richness and good stuff going on in that, in those local initiatives. I actually did a deep retrofit of a Victorian house in London. The biggest problem I had was dealing with the council in Westminster, because I had to do things like put in what they call heritage skylights. Heritage means incredibly energy inefficient. It's absurd. We're using the planning, there are these jumped up planners working off books that were written before climate change was understood. It's absurd. It holds you back. It adds costs to your renovation. It makes them more difficult. It forces you to use stupid solutions. You know all about this, I'm sure. You'll know what I'm talking about. So I would fix that. There's a little thing, arcane maybe, but very, very important. I'm on the board of Transport for London. We're buying a lot of trains. When I say a lot, I mean billions and billions, depending on whether we have enough people riding the tube in the next year. Please use the tube. Don't cycle. It's very bad for our economics. But when I asked, what are we doing to make sure those trains are as efficient as possible? Are we using a shadow carbon price? Nobody in 2-3 levels of management knew. But we got down to the level that did know, and we were using a shadow carbon price in the RFP that went out to manufacturers. So I really dived in, very unusual for a board member to get this level. How is that carbon price set? Well, the answer is it's based on the electricity that's going to be used, times the carbon intensity of that electricity, times the carbon price, which, by the way, goes higher than 57 or it actually goes up to 70, 80 pounds in the out years. Great. The problem is the carbon intensity used in that calculation in the Green Book for local authorities and Transport for London comes from, at the time, DEC, now BEIS. So it's going to be carbon neutral, isn't it? Because that's what the government says is going to happen. It should come from the Climate Change Committee. Yeah. It should be an independent body, just as we use the Office of whatever it is, budgetary, the statistics come from the whatever it's called, budgetary, what's it called? The independent...
The OBR, yeah.
The OBR. See, I told you, everything's... everything that comes from, to do with the intensity should be an independent body. Be an easy change, we could do it within 2 years, and then all local authorities will be using reality instead of wishful thinking for their shadow carbon prices. There's lots of other things. I mean, building zero carbon buildings, those sorts of things, absolutely. In terms of Europe and what we should do, why can't we do all of this anyway? And so on, I think going through the Brexit process, particularly in energy, we need to continue to trade in and out of Europe, particularly on electricity, because if you try to go zero carbon or low carbon in your electricity on an islanded system, on an island without interconnections, it's expensive. You have to build massively more to cover the time when there's no supply. So you connect, right? What I would say is that, so as we go through Brexit, we need to make sure not just that we're maintaining that trading system, but we need to keep building interconnections. There is a list of them, but don't let them get delayed by Brexit. Very, very important for them and for us, because Ireland connects to us a lot, and so for everybody to do the transition cheaply, build those connections. Can it be done? Yes. The two countries that trade most in Europe across their borders are Switzerland and Norway. Right? So it can be done. I'm not saying use their system and the EEA, not getting into that. But we can do it, we must do it. But also, one of the things you say, well, you ask, what can't we do as part of Europe? Well, Europe doesn't have a single energy market. We have lots of national energy markets, and when we got the cold weather just recently, the French regulator forbade French actors from selling energy to the UK in case the French needed it. I mean, that's not... that you can't have that system, you can't rely on that sort of system where countries continue to make national decisions pretending that it's in some way for the EU common good. We have very poor interconnection between Iberia and France. Why? Because the French, it's all to do with the nuclear and protecting, etc., etc. So we are, in some ways, as long as we can interconnect, trade in and out, better off out of some of those market rules. And then finally, what can we do out that we can't do? Innovation, right? Horizon 2020 is not a machine for innovation. It is social policy. It is about scientists going off and having a nice time studying at other universities. It's about mega projects. It's not about innovation in the way that, for instance, the US ARPA, ARPA-E, DARPA, and venture capital industry works as a massive engine for innovation. Horizon 2020 is essentially recreational social policy. It's all about putting together consortia with members from different countries. Particularly, you can't win if you have to have 3 countries. You need one from the Balkans. It's all nonsense. So we are better off. What's going to happen, by the way, we're going to get out, and then we're going to buy our way back in without getting reform of Horizon 2020, which is a tragedy. But to the extent we
can... If we'd stayed in, we could have reformed it, I'm only saying.
Well, no, we tried, we failed reform, and we're not going to refight the election.
No, we're not.
So those are the things that I think we should make sure that we can innovate and that we retain our connection, but not the foolish rules that we are subject to.
And just your Transport for London anecdote, the city...
Oh, and transportation, sorry. There's another thing about really pushing for electrification, which the EU is not going to do because Germany wants to retain what I call the diesel industrial complex. They're going to slow pedal on that, and we're going to fast pedal.
Okay, good. And just to add to your Transport for London anecdote, the city of Oslo has now instituted a climate budget process that sits alongside its financial budget process. And indeed, the climate budget takes precedence, so every financial decision has to have first been audited for the carbon consequences, which is really changing the decisions.
Norway's model is very simple. We will make no emissions. We will sell the gas. We will sell the oil. As long as we can keep doing that, we are the virtuous ones.
I'm going to come back to you, Craig.
Which doesn't really fit in with what Ruth was saying earlier about making sure that we don't want to follow that model because we need to make sure that we are being responsible about land use and emissions that are done elsewhere. We've been exporting our emissions for a long time. We haven't even got onto the issue of shipping. Almost everything that we buy has been made somewhere else. So not only supply chains but also shipping is an important part of how we manage to neutralise our carbon emissions.
We might come to that in the next round. Bruce has been waiting patiently to come
on
this.
I'm going to keep it a bit shorter because I think there's been a lot on this topic that's been covered by my fellow panelists. But I would say that I would observe, and I'm in my world, I'm seeing companies that are today they're locating their manufacturing on the continent. They're looking at Brandenburg, south of Berlin, where there are some very advantageous EIB and other funding mechanisms available to. Which is job creation that is not happening here, but it is going. It's going into that market. So I am less ebullient about our and take perhaps a different view, Michael, to you, which is I think that we're going. We are going through a period of headwinds, and I think we're feeling the pain, and we will feel that more pain around because we've just turned the UK market from the beachhead into the largest market in the world, into a domestic market, and a domestic market which has some opaque attributes relative to capital formation. So we have got to get a grip. This is not a nice to have. This is survival, and if we don't take this kind of fragmented, inefficient system that takes leprechauns to pull through the capital and focus on real and rather than smattering a bunch of little R&D funding here and there and throw it at proper matched funding programs that help companies cross the chasm to become winners, we're not going to support our communities with indigenous. We're going to be importing rather than domestically developing and innovating the technologies that need to support our communities. So
you won't find me disagreeing that we're facing those headwinds and we need to respond.
Yeah. So I feel, gosh, actually, what we've got to do is double up this capital support. We've got to figure out a way to hang on to the jobs. I take a different view, Michael, to you relative to the electrification transport. I don't believe that Germany is slow rolling the electrification transport. In fact, quite the reverse, because they realize it's survival. There's a platform change, and if they don't lead, they're going to have their lunch eaten by the Chinese or and Asia Inc. and Tesla and so on. So it is happening. We just need to do it faster. And if we can't align our policies and align our industrial system in a way to more efficiently channel the capital, the entrepreneurial talent, and the jobs, use it or lose it, we're going to find that we're in a kind of cold, dark place. So, this is, I think for all of us, there's a real sense of urgency. We've got to grip this, and this is no longer just a discussion. This is really about action, immediate action.
The debate is breaking out, and in that spirit, Craig, I want to just come back to you. So on Michael's point, we can't have a single price of carbon, can't just do the cheapest stuff first, because we'll lock in high carbon.
Well, that, Michael's point has been made repeatedly for more than a decade, and we've had deforestation, we have soil degradation, we lose 31 football fields of soil every minute because we don't price carbon. We can't keep on losing soil at that rate. It's what feeds us. We can't keep on deforesting. And so we have to reward all carbon equally. That's,
well, we saw what you did there. The equally you slipped in at the end. Utopianism won't solve the problem. Won't solve the problem. We'll have another decade, another 2, another 10, another 100
pushing
decades.
soil and
No, I agree with the soil.
The
Yes.
reason the
It was
government has this plan is to get
Yeah.
soil on the agenda. If you read
100%.
the plan, it's 100% about soils
Yeah.
and forests, because that's the only thing that's going to
But you-
save us,
but
and
you-
we've been
But to be fair,
undervaluing
you
it
jumped
for a
from
decade.
that to saying one single carbon price equally, and that's the issue.
Well, you can
It's
do
not
other
about-
things. You can do other things for solar. You know, we've spent $1.5 billion on carbon capture and storage. That's government money wasted on a technology that has no future. And it stopped spending that money. I'm sorry, Polly, but you know, it's a complete waste of money. We have to use the practical, available, known technologies. And the biggest single one is photosynthesis that turns carbon dioxide into wood or organic matter in the soil. We just can't ignore that anymore.
I fear that is where we must leave it. I assume that bell means we have to stop. It does indeed, in which case, thanks very much to the fantastic panel. Let's give them a round of applause.